Well, hello, everybody. And as I always say, welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs, the podcast show that keeps streaming stories of leadership, entrepreneurship, business in this economy. Thousands of leaders we've talked to over the years. And it's interesting how people are always adapting and finding their ways and their path to success. Our next guest is Amy Sousa, CEO, The Guild for Human Services. Welcome.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Nice to be here.
Thank you. If I can call it the Guild, what's the Guild for Human Services?
Yeah, the Guild for Human Services, or the Guild, is a nonprofit organization located here in Massachusetts, and we provide education and residential services as well as clinical services to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in 25 different locations in Northeast Mass.
Is this to find places to live?
A combination. So we do have group homes for both adults and residential youth, and we have an special education school, as well as clinical services and supports.
Wow. Did you start this business yourself?
I did not. We started in 1947, so
You're not that old.
not yet, not yet. But we've been around for quite a long time. When institutionalization was still alive and well in the Commonwealth, the Guild was operating as a community-based program, and so went through all of deinstitutionalization into the modern day, where we are completely community-based and integrated into society.
Wow. So can you give us sort of the evolution of the business? I guess that's prior to you, and then how it intersected with you joining?
Yeah, so again, we started in 1947 at a time when, we were called the Protestant Guild for the Blind initially. There was a pretty strong epidemic of blindness in the Commonwealth and in the country. At that time, the medical community was over-oxygenating preemies. And so we had a bout of folks who were growing up visually impaired. And so many services emerged. The Guild emerged as a service for blind young people and adults who also had complicated cognitive backgrounds. So many of those preemies not only had blindness, but had cognitive impairments. And so we emerged as a service provider that would work with people who had both blindness and developmental disabilities. And we've evolved from there. We evolved into a special education school and group homes for adults, as well as day and work programs for people with intellectual disabilities.
I'm sorry, you probably don't want me to go down this road, but preemies with cognitive issues and potentially visual impairment. Was that as a result of the delivery of the way children were being handled in those days? I mean, it just you had my head raised
Yeah, spinning.
all over the place trying to figure out, which I can't, what was the cause, because obviously they've mitigated some of the causes to date. So something was being done maybe wrong.
Well, medicine is an evolving practice. And so as, more and more babies were surviving prematurely, right, we had to evolve our practices, right? And so,
I was a preemie, so.
yeah. Well, if you're born in 1947, you probably would not have survived at 24 weeks. You may very well survive now. And so a lot of medicine and technology has gone into that survival. Over time, one of the things that was done was providing a high level of oxygen to preemies, and it was found that that level of oxygen caused blindness, just not known at the time, but has since evolved. And there have been lots of studies on it, but that's part of our history. It's certainly not the only cause of blindness, and developmental disabilities come from any number of sources: genetic, environmental, stroke. And so we serve people of all kinds here.
Was there a particular kind of cognitive issues that showed up more predictably than others?
Not necessarily. I think the scope of developmental disabilities has certainly changed over time with our diagnostic ability. So I know autism is, certainly considered more prevalent now, but what folks often don't know is that we've changed definitions and criteria for autism over the course of, many decades. And so, as we change our ability to understand, so too do the numbers. What we serve is people who need extra support making decisions and having daily care needs met. And we do that through housing and clinical support as well as education.
So interesting. What was your path to the organization?
Long and creative. I think as any leader knows that there's often not a straight line from here to there. And so I started off in public policy and advocacy for survivors of domestic and sexual violence.
Wow.
And yeah, and so over time I realized that, the more people I was working with, the more I realized that vulnerability comes in a variety of different ways, and found that there was just a lack of services and support for people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And so moved more into that space, looking at trauma work and eventually at community care work, which is what I do now.
How compassionate. That's wonderful. So, who typically uses your services? And is it state funded at all, locally funded?
Great question. So, who uses our services? People with intellectual disabilities. So, just under 100% of the people we support have an intellectual disability. About 80% of those people also have autism. Another 50% of those folks have some kind of mental health diagnosis. And we know that that's an underrepresentation because most mental health diagnoses are made through verbal communication, and 1/3 of our population is non-speaking. So they use methods other than voice communication to get their needs met. So it's a very complicated population and not one that's well served by many places. We are unique in that way.
And the financing.
The
Uh,
financing is getting more complicated as the days go on, Jeffrey. So my answer today may be different than my answer tomorrow, as I suspect may be true for many of your listeners and their businesses.
my clients who are getting money from different sources who are in the mental health or physical health business.
Yeah, I will say that much will change with Medicaid. So I'll start generally, and then I would love to talk with you about Medicaid and the impact on this population, because it will be enormous. So our funding sources come depending on if you are under 22 years old. So if you're a young person who has an IEP or an individual education plan, in that case, your services most likely come through school districts or through the Department of Children and Families. So about 1/3 of the students we serve have involvement with DCF, which is Child Protection Agency. For the adult portion of the population, that funding comes through one of two places, either the Department of Developmental Services or the Mass Commission for the Blind. Again, mostly it's through DDS, and that is Medicaid pass-through money. So when we think about Medicaid reform, most folks think about private health insurance, and that's a part of Medicaid. But Medicaid also covers home and community-based services, which is the majority of residential services and job training, as well as long-term supports and services. All of that comes out of Medicaid waiver programs that's now being considered in Congress for cutting.
You don't have an easy job.
It's a great job, Jeffrey. I get to be part of a community of people who are connected and who are thinking and working towards quality of life every day. And the term quality of life is not used loosely here. And for so many other businesses, it's an afterthought. It's the thing that you do after work. And I get to pay attention to quality of life as my job. It's a great, great place to work.
That's a great answer. Again, I'm going to take you maybe a little to left field again, because you've again tickled my lateral thinking. We had someone we worked with a few years ago who was dealing in a somewhat different but similar population. And they said that there were certain ethnic groups who were quite embarrassed by their children having these types of problems, and they were difficult to get in as clients. Do you find that there is an ethnic bias towards some populations being more willing to talk with you and use your services than others?
Not particularly. What I will say is that the Guild employs people from more than 24 countries around the world who have immigrated to the United States. And so it's an incredibly culturally diverse workplace. And so I have not necessarily experienced what you're talking about.
Not about work, it's about the children of the parents.
Sure. And that's true for, American-born Caucasian families and as much as any other, ethnicity or nationality. I think what's complicated for families and parents in particular is having an expectation of what you think your child might be, and then having a child who might be different than your expectation. And that's true if you're a group of lawyers and you're raising a doctor. That's true if you are, a custodian and raising a lawyer, right? It's just not what you necessarily thought. And so adjusting expectations and understanding who your child is and who your parents are, which is a complicated thing in and of itself. But building a relationship with the person and not the expectation can be complicated for all of us with or without an intellectual disability.
All very interesting, Amy. I'm sure I could talk to you a lot longer. Great work that you're doing. We're speaking with Amy Sousa, CEO of the Guild for Human Services. Amy, if someone wants to know more about the Guild, how do they find you?
Absolutely. You could look us up online at www.guildhumanservices.org, or you can find us on pretty much any social media platform at the Guild for Human Services. And my name is Amy Sousa. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can find me on our website as well.
Thank you very much for being on Radio Entrepreneurs today. Very
Thank
much
you, Jeffrey.
appreciate it. Remind everybody more stories to follow.